He always believed land remembered those who cared for it. The wide open stretch of earth had been in his family longer than anyone alive could recall. His grandfather once walked it at sunrise, touching the soil like greeting an old friend. Later, his father taught him where the ground stayed firm after rain and where water liked to rest when the land came to him. It felt less like ownership and more like duty. He never rushed. He'd never tried to squeeze money out of ETH. Let it breathe. The land sat just outside a fast-growing town. Every year the town pushed closer. New roads, new stores, new houses all crept toward the open fields. But his land stayed quiet. Tall grass moved with the wind. Old trees stood where they always had. A narrow water channel ran along the lower edge, calm most of the year. It was nothing dramatic, just part of how the land stayed alive. He lived simply, worked long hours, visited the land only when time allowed. Sometimes months passed between visits, but he never worried. The paperwork was solid, the taxes were paid, the boundaries were clear. There was no reason to think anything could change without his knowing. One spring afternoon he decided to drive out. No reason in particular, just a feeling that he wanted to walk the ground again. The drive felt normal at first. The familiar road curved as always, but then he noticed something: a traffic knot. Farm trucks or local cars, but large vehicles moving slowly followed them without much thought. Then the road widened, fresh asphalt replaced the old cracked surface. Bright markers stood where there used to be weeds. His chest tightened slightly, though he could not explain why. He kept driving. The land finally came into view. He did not stop right away. His mind needed a moment to understand what his eyes were seeing. The open field was gone. In its place stood framed houses, neat rows of structures, half-built wood in concrete and steel filled the space where grass once moved freely. Heavy machines rested like animals after feeding. He parked the car. The silence inside him grew loud. He stepped out slowly. The smell of construction hung in the air. Dust coated his shoes. This was not a small mistake. This was not a fence placed a little too far. This was an entire neighborhood rising from his land. Signs stood near the entrance, bright, clean letters promised a peaceful community. They spoke of comfort, safety, and shared values. A name he did not recognize marked the development below. Its smaller words mentioned an association. He walked further. Workers moved around him, barely noticing. They acted like they belonged, like this place had always been meant for this purpose. No one stopped him. No one asked who he was. He reached a spot near the water channel. The narrow flow still ran quietly, but now pipes and drains pointed toward. If the land had been reshaped, the natural slopes altered, someone had made careful plans here. He stood there for a long time. Memories rose up. His father warning him that land does not forgive carelessness. His grandfather explaining how water always finds its path. These were lessons learned slowly over years, yet here they were ignored in months. Finally, he returned to his car. His hand shook as he opened the glove compartments. Inside lay copies of documents he always carried. Old habits die hard. He pulled them out, one by one, the deed, the surveys, the tax records. Everything was in order. Everything still bore his name. Confusion tried to turn into anger. Cloud's judgment. He needed clarity, not noise. He sat in the car and watched trucks arrive, watched workers measure and cut, watched walls rise. That evening, he returned home quietly, laid the papers across the table. He checked dates and stamps again. Nothing had changed. Nothing had expired the next day. He made calls, not angry calls. Ones he asked simple questions. Who approved the construction? Who owned the land? Most responses were vague. Some promised to look into it, others passed him along. Days past, construction continued. He returned to the land. Often now no one challenged him. No signs mentioned private access. The more he watched, the more certain he became. They believed they were untouchably. Eventually he reached someone from the association. The voice on the phone sounded confident, almost bored. They spoke as if reading from a script. Permits, approvals, zoning, everything handled. When he said the land was his, the response was a brief pause followed by dismissal. They suggested he was mistaken, that records changed, that development moves forward. They advised him to speak to legal counsel. The call ended politely, but the message was clear. were not worried. He did speak to a lawyer, a quiet one who listened more than he spoke together. They reviewed everything. The lawyer confirmed what he already knew. The land was his, every inch of it. The lawyer suggested immediate action, a stop order and injunction, but he shook his head not. TD wanted to understand how something like this could happen. He wanted to see how far they would go. Weeks turned into months. Frames became walls. Walls became roofs. Roads were laid. Lawns were marked. 35 homes took shape, one standing on ground that remembered grass and rain. Neighbors from nearby areas began visiting. They admired the progress they spoke of. Rising property values. They never looked at him twice. To them, he was just another passerby at night. He studied old maps, not just ownership lines, but water paths. He traced how rain moved across the land, how the channel fed into larger systems. There were notes in the margins left by people. Longer notes about flow and control. Something important stirred in his mind. A detail overlooked, a right tied to the land that had nothing to do with houses, something older than the town itself. He did not smile. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. He simply closed the map and rested his hand on it. The land had not changed, only the people had forgotten how it worked. And as the first families prepared to move in, he remained patient, because patience was something the land had taught him. Wealth. That change did not happen all at once, but it became impossible to ignore. Each visit showed something new. More concrete poured, more walls standing. The sound of hammers echoed across land that once only heard birds and wind. He walked slowly, every time letting the place speak to him. People began to appear where there were none before. Workers first, then supervisors, then strangers walking with clipboards. She talked loudly and laughed as if the ground beneath them owed them nothing. He noticed how confidently they moved. No hesitation, no doubt. One afternoon, a man approached him near the edge of the site. The man wore a bright vest and carried rolled papers. He asked politely if he needed help. The tone was friendly but firm when he said the land was his. The smile thinned. The man nodded slowly, then said the project was approved. He suggested stepping away from active work areas. It was the first time someone hinted he did not belong. He left without argument, not because he agreed, but because he was learning how they saw the world. Calls continued. More offices, more voices, some listening, most did not. The answers followed the same pattern. Permits, zoning plans, everything filed, everything cleared. One voice finally told him something useful. They mentioned a purchase that never happened, a deal assumed completed. An old survey misread, boundary line shifted on paper but never on ground. That night he sat longer than usual at the table. Maps spread wide, documents layered carefully. He traced the original boundaries with his finger. They were clear and solid. Nothing overlapped. Nothing suggested confusion. Yet somewhere a copy had been altered, not by him, not legally, but enough to convince people who never looked twice. He realized then that this was not simple carelessness. It was speed. The town wanted growth. The association wanted profit. No one wanted delays. They trusted whatever moved them forward. Construction accelerated. The pace became almost frantic, as if they sensed time mattered. As if stopping now would cost too much. He noticed signs advertising move and dates. Families toured the site. Children ran between unfinished homes laughing. He felt a strange mix of sadness and resolve. These people believed in a promise that rested on a lie. His lawyer advised again to stop everything, to protect himself immediately. But still waited. Stopping now would end the story too early. Needed the truth exposed fully. He began documenting quietly. Photos taken from public roads, dates written down, changes noted. He kept records the way his grandfather once did, slowly, carefully, without emotion. One evening, he met a woman near the edge of the development. She was looking at a nearly finished house. She spoke excitedly about fresh starts and safe streets. He listened. He said nothing about ownership. That was not her burden. The association held meetings. They spoke of community rules and shared responsibility. They spoke of order. They never spoke of the land itself. He attended one meeting without announcing who he was. He sat in the back. He listened. Confidence filled the room. They believed paperwork made them untouchable. When someone asked about drainage concerns, they brushed it aside. They said everything was engineered, everything accounted for. He felt the weight of that lie settle in his chest. The land had its own memory water, had its own patience. No plan ignored that forever. He Left the meeting early. Outside rain began to fall lightly. The ground absorbed it easily as it always had, he watched. Where the water flowed toward, the channel toward control points older than any house. Frame weeks later, walls were painted driveways, finished mailboxes installed. The place no longer looked temporary, it looked permanent. That was when letters arrived. Once polite but firm, they asked him to cease interference. They warned of consequences. He smiled for the first time, not from joy, but from clarity. They finally noticed him. His lawyer reviewed the letters. Calmly, nothing in them held weight. They were intimidation. Dressed as professionalism, he responded once briefly. He stated ownership attached, proof requested, acknowledgement. No reply came. Instead, construction finished faster. Families began moving in, lights turned on at night. The land glowed in ways it never had. Standing at the edge, one evening he felt the shift. This was no longer about property alone, it was about truth and consequence, about what happens when people forget history. He placed his hand on the soil. It was damp and steady. The land was waiting. So was he. By the time summer settled in, the place no longer felt like land in waiting. It felt like a finished idea. Houses stood clean and bright. Cars lined the new streets. Voices carried across evenings. Where once there had only been wind, he visited less often now, not because he stopped caring, but because watching too closely stirred emotions. He kept buried still. He observed from a distance, from roads, from memory, from quiet walks at dawn when most people slept. What troubled him most was not the houses, it was how confidently everything rested on assumptions. No one questioned what lay beneath. No one asked how the ground behaved before concrete. He returned to old notebooks kept in a wooden box. They belonged to his father and his grandfather before him. Pages were yellowed writing, uneven, but the knowledge inside was solid. There were sketches of slopes, notes about seasonal rain marks, showing where water gathered during heavy storms. One section appeared again and again. Narrow channel marked with care. Comments written in careful lines spoke of control and release. He remembered walking there as a boy, being warned not to touch certain gates, not because they were dangerous, but because they mattered. Those gates were quiet most of the year, forgotten by anyone who did not know what they did. He drove out one morning after a long night of rain. Clouds still hung low. The air smelled fresh. He walked toward the channel. The water moved faster than usual, not wild but steady. He watched how it followed paths laid down long before machines arrived. The drains from the development fed into it now, all of it converging toward a single point. He stood there a long time listening, remembering that was when the missing piece became clear. The land did not just carry ownership, it carried responsibility, and with that responsibility came authority. He contacted a specialist, quietly, someone who understood land history and water rights. They spoke at length. Maps were reviewed, records pulled from archives few ever visited. The truth settled slowly but firmly. The land included control rights over water flow, not symbolic rights, active ones, legal and binding, older than zoning, laws older than the town itself. Those rights had been respected for generations because people once understood water. Now they were ignored because people trusted paperwork alone. The specialist warned him, exercising those rights required care. Timing mattered, process mattered. He nodded. He had waited this long. Meanwhile, life inside the development moved forward. Neighbors introduced themselves. Gardens were planted. Children learned the curves of the new streets no one imagined. What lay beneath their routines? He felt no anger toward them. Only concern and resolve. Letters arrived against stronger language. This time claims of disruption, warnings of legal action. His lawyer reviewed them calmly, then smiled faintly because now there was more to say. They prepared responses rooted in history and records, untouched by modern shortcuts. Each word measured, each claim backed by proof. The association dismissed the responses. They believed progress protected them. They believed size and money outweighed one quiet man, but progress built on ignored truth carries weight, and weight eventually presses down. Storm forecasts appeared. He watched the sky nod eagerly, just attentively. The land was patient. Was he as summer storms gathered strength? He knew the moment was approaching. Not one of revenge, but one of correction, because land does not choose sides, it only follows its nature. And soon everyone would be forced to remember that. The first notice arrived, quietly slipped among ordinary mail. It spoke of legal steps and formal complaints. The association claimed disruption and risk. They demanded compliance and cooperation. He read it once, then set it aside. There was no rush. Everything that mattered was already in motion. Meetings followed rooms. Filled with sharp voices and confident gestures, they spoke of authority and process. They pointed to permits and approvals. They spoke as if history began with their signatures. He attended one session with his lawyer. He sat still while others spoke. Loudly charts were displayed, plans praised. When his lawyer finally spoke, the room shifted. Documents older than any chart were placed on the table maps. Drawn by hand records stamped long before development codes existed, the room grew quiet. Someone laughed. Nervously, another dismissed the relevance they believed age meant weakness. The judge requested time not to dismiss but to consider. Pause was ordered. Temporary measures put in place. Outside the courthouse, clouds gathered. The forecast grew heavier with each passing day. The association hurried. They sent crews to reinforce drainage. They worked late into evenings, trying to outbuild the land itself. Watched from afar, not interfering, just observing. Rain began softly at first, then steadily, then without pause. Channel filled as it always had. Water followed memory, not designed with legal authority. Confirmed he acted not dramatically, not recklessly, simply as the land required. Control points were adjusted, gates open to proper levels, nothing excessive, nothing beyond what had always been allowed. Water flowed. It moved calmly at first, then purposefully finding paths prepared by nature's streets.
Darkened lawns?
Softened basements felt the change. Phones rang, voices rose, meetings turned frantic. Emergency crews arrived, but water does not argue, it only moves. He stood beneath shelter, watching the rain, not smiling, not celebrating, just witnessing correction. By morning the development looked different, still standing but shaken. Truth had surfaced, not through force, but through patience, and there was no turning back. The days that followed were quiet in a strange way, not peaceful, but heaviest. If everyone was waiting for something to finish, falling water slowly pulled back into its channels. Mud dried where grass once tried to grow. The houses remained standing, but they no longer looked new. They looked tested. Neighbors gathered outside in small groups. Voices stayed low. Questions moved from house to house, not about weather, but about truth. Association released statements. Careful words meant to calm fear. They promised repairs and support, but promises sound thin when foundations shift. Inspectors arrived, then more inspectors. They measured levels, checked structures, reviewed drainage. Each visit brought the same quiet shake of the head. Insurance representatives came next. Clipboards in hand, they listened politely, then pointed to clauses: illegal placement, improper development, ownership disputes, coverage denied. The reality spread quickly. Meetings turned tense. Anger replaced confusion, not toward the landowner, but toward those who assured safety. Lawsuits followed, not dramatic ones, simple claims of responsibility, of trust broken. The association leadership disappeared from view. Phones unanswered, offices closed early, their confidence drained faster. Then the water court resumed, this time without arrogance only. Urgency documents were reviewed again, but now they were read carefully, not skimmed. It assumed the truth stood unchanged. The land was never theirs. The water rights were always realled. The warnings had been ignored. Judgment came without spectacle, just confirmation. Ownership firmed, responsibility assigned. Settlements followed, large ones, quiet ones, enough to end careers, enough to erase futures built on shortcuts. Some homes were repaired, the others were bought back. Few were left empty, too damaged to trust. Families moved away carrying disappointment and lessons. They did not curse the land, they cursed those who failed to respect. I've walked the property again after everything settled. The ground felt familiar, scarred in places, but healing. He did not feel victory, only relief and a deep, tired calm. He restored what he could, moved what never belonged, let grass return, let water flow freely. Towns slowed for a while after that. Permits examined more closely. Boundaries respected. Questions asked twice. People remembered, at least for a time. He kept the land as he always had, quiet, patient, because land does not rush, and neither did he. The story ended not with revenge, but with correction, and the land remembered. Time moved forward in small, steady ways after everything ended, not with noise or attention, but with routine. Mourning Light returned to the land without reflecting off windows that no longer mattered. The roads that once cut through the field faded back into quiet paths. Some were broken apart, others left to be taken slowly by grass. He continued his life much as before. Work filled his days. Evenings stayed simple. Story followed him only when others brought it up. He never corrected them, never added drama. What happened spoke well enough on its own. Occasionally someone would stop him near the property. They asked questions. Not legal ones, but personal ones. Why he waited so long, why he did not stop it sooner. He answered honestly, because sometimes truth needs space to reveal itself. The land began to heal in its own way. Water returned to familiar patterns. Soil settled wild. Plants appeared where they always had before. Concrete tried to claim the groundbirds. Returned first, then small animals, then quiet. The town remembered. For a while, rules were tightened, surveys rechecked, told records pulled from storage. People spoke about responsibility as if it were new, but it was not. It had just been ignored, and developers came slower after that. They asked more questions. They walked land instead of only reading papers. Some left when they learned what patience required. That did not bother him. He found comfort in knowing the land remained whole, not perfect but honest. On certain evenings, he walked the channel again, the control points, rested quietly, doing what they had always done. Nothing dramatic, nothing forced. He thought often of those who came before him, of lessons passed down without speeches, only through example. Those lessons had carried him through without anger, without regret. People sometimes asked if he would sell now, with the land proven valuable, with attention finally gone. Hey, always answered the same way. Some things are not measured that way. The story slowly turned into a lesson told secondhand, shortens, simplified, but still carrying truth in the land. Remain patient as ever, waiting only to be respected. Years passed without announcement, marked by events but by season. Spring returned again, and again grass grew tall where walls once stood. The land no longer carried signs of conflict, only memory. He aged quietly alongside it. Hair grayed, steps slowed slightly, but his connection to the ground never weakened. If anything, it deepened. People who moved into the town later rarely knew the full story. They heard fragments, a rumor about water, a lesson about paperwork, nothing more. That was enough. Stories do not need to be shouted to survive. They only need truths. Sometimes children from nearby homes wandered close. They played near the open field. Parents watched from a distance. No fences warned them away, no signs claimed ownership loudly. The land did not need that anymore. He liked seeing that. It meant trust had returned. One afternoon, a young couple approached him. They asked about the land, not with greed, but curiosity. They wanted to understand why it stayed untouched. He told them simply, some places carry more than value. They carry balance. They nodded, even if they did not fully understand. Understanding comes later. The channel still flowed quietly. During storms it moved with purpose, never overflowing, never silent. Maintained it the way it had always been maintained, with care, not controlled. Looking back, he realized the conflict never changed who he was. It only revealed what he already believed, that rushing land leads to loss, that ignoring history invites correction. The association no longer existed. Its name faded from records for memory only. Its mistake remained. He never spoke badly of them. There was no need, though. Lessons stood taller than blame. As time went on, the town expanded in other directions, avoiding his land not out of fear, but respect. One evening he stood at the edge of the field, watching sunset lights stretched across open space and broken. He felt content, not proud, not bitter, just aligned. The land had been patient with him. He had returned the favor, and that was enough. The years after quiet settled did not stay empty forever. Quiet never means finished. It only means waiting, though. Town kept growing, even if it avoided his land. New streets curved around it, like water around stone. New buildings rose farther away, though. Open field became a pause in the middle of movement. People noticed that some respected each, others questioned. Ita first sensed change through small things: cars slowing near the road, strangers standing longer than needed, ease measuring distance and value. One afternoon a man waited near the fence line, not crossing, just watching. When he noticed him, the man nodded politely and left. It happened again weeks later with someone else. Then Again, different faces, same curiosity. He understood then that attention had returned on. Loud like before, but careful the land had become. Known not as a mistake, but as a story on. Stories attract people who want to rewrite them. Letters began arriving, not threats, this time offers carefully. Worded respectful on the surface, they spoke of partnership, of shared benefit, of legacy projects. He read each one slowly, then placed them aside. Money was never the language the land spoke. He continued his routines, morning walks, evening checks near the channel. The gates remained steady. Water obeyed memory, but patience does not mean blindness. He watched patterns, who asked questions, who pulled records, who spoke to town officials. New proposals surfaced at a council meeting, not directly about his land, but about surrounding access infrastructure upgrades, emergency routes. He attended, quietly sat near the back, listened. The language sounded familiar to familiar. It carried the same confidence. He remembered different people, same belief that progress alone granted permission. They spoke of necessity, of future growth, of planning beyond old boundaries. Old boundaries. He felt the phrase settle heavy. After the meeting, he spoke to his lawyer again, not urgently, just carefully. They reviewed maps, compared proposals. Pattern was clear. If access changed, if pressure built, the land could be isolated or forced into negotiation. Illegal, just strategic. He did not react immediately. Reaction invites control instead. He walked the land again, longer this time, from edge to edge. He listened. The soil still felt right. The channel still flowed. True, nothing had changed beneath the surface. Steadied him. Weeks later, someone requested a formal meeting. Representative of a development group. The tone was polite, almost friendly. He
acting not
because he was interested, but because listening costs nothing. They met at a simple table, no contracts. Laid out, just conversation. The representative spoke about opportunity, about honoring the past while shaping the future. He nodded where appropriate, said little. Eventually the question came, what would it take? He answered honestly. Respect. The representative smiled uncertainly. That was not an amount. The meeting ended without resolution, but not without intention. After that, activity around the land increased. Survey markers appeared near public edges. People measured distances again. Everything stayed legal, which made it more dangerous. He returned to his notebooks, to the words written long ago. Lessons about patience and ground and time. One note stood out. Land does not shout when threatened, it waits. So did he. The pressure grew subtle but steady. Town discussions, budget adjustments, new studies commission, dull, circling, never touching. He realized this chapter would not be fought in courtrooms. It would be fought in rooms filled with calm voices and quiet leverage that required a different kind of patience. He prepared. Quietly reviewed rights again, not just water but access, history, usage patterns. Agreements forgotten, the land still held them all. Land, as another season turned here, felt the familiar certainty return. Whatever came next, it would unfold fully, because rushing truth only hides at hand. The land had never hidden anything. Pressure rarely arrives loudly. It arrives as invitation, as concern, as planning for everyone's good. After the meeting, activity increased in careful ways, not machines this time, but conversations, emails, gatherings in quiet rooms. He noticed town officials visiting nearby properties, walking boundaries, taking notes. They never crossed onto his land, but they spoke about it often. Words like access, safety, and future came up again and again, always framed as neutral, always sounding reasonable. That was the danger. He attended more meetings now, still quiet, still listening. At one session, someone suggested the town needed a shared corridor, a green passage for utilities and emergency flow. They spoke of cooperation. And long-term vision maps appeared, colored lines edged closer to his property, never crossing yet. Felt the familiar tightening in his chest, not fear, recognition. This was how pressure worked when it learned from past mistakes. After the meeting at council, member approached him, friendly, tone respectful words. They praised his patience and stewardship, then asked gently if he would consider dialogue. He said he already was at home that night. He opened old files again, not just land records, but correspondence letters between past owners and the town agreements written in careful language. He found what he expected, promises made long ago. Access allowed under conditions that were never removed. The land was not isolated. It was interconnected in ways paper. Maps rarely showed. He met again with his lawyer. They spoke less about defense now. About clarity. If pressure continued, the truth would need to be spoken plainly. Weeks past, the town released a draft plan. Public comment invited. The plan praised open space and heritage, then quietly suggested future alignment. Was the word. Neighbors asked him what it meant. He answered honestly, it meant someone wanted control without saying so. Public opinion shifted subtly. Some felt the land should serve everyone. Others felt it already did by remaining open. He never argued. Arguments hardened people. He told stories instead, about water, about patience, about mistakes already paid. For some listens, some did not. Then came the study and environmental review commissioned by the town. The results were careful. Neutralette highlighted the importance of the channel and surrounding land. He smiled at that facts of weight when left alone. The study recommended preservation over development, caution over speed. The draft plan changed tone after that. Lines pulled back. Language softened. Pressure eased slightly, not gone but redirected. He walked the land again that evening. Long shadows stretched across open ground. The channel reflected the sky. The land remained steady. He realized this conflict would not end with one moment or one decision. It would unfold over years, through vigilance and memory. That was acceptable because the land was not in a hurry, and neither was he. The season turned again without announcement. Leaves changed color, then fell. Rain followed, then cold. The pressure that once circled quietly began to thin, not because people lost interest, but because clarity had entered the conversation. The town adjusted its plans, not publicly admitting error, just refining direction. They spoke now of preservation corridors and protected flow zones, words that respected the land without saying his name. He did not attend the final meeting. He already knew the outcome. The land had spoken through facts and patience. Neighbors stopped asking questions. The tension that once hovered faded into acceptance. People returned to daily routines. Children played, cars passed, life continued. He felt no sense of triumph, only balance restored. One afternoon he received a letter, an offer, not a request. A simple acknowledgement. The town thanked him for cooperation and stewardship, placed it in the box with the old notebooks. Another reminder years later. Land looked much as it had before the first machines arrived. Dope and quiet, alive. Visitors still paused near the road, some curious, some respectful, but fewer each year. The story softened into memory, then into lesson. He walked the channel one last time before winter settled, checked the gates, listened to the water. Everything flowed as it should. Understood then that land ownership was never about holding. It was about listening. The land had asked for time. He had given it hand. In return, it had held firm. That was enough. The story did not end, it simply rested.